Our next speaker is Sheri Graner. Sheri wrote and designed games in the iconic Ultima franchise. She served as creative director and director of product development at Her Interactive. In 2003, she published her book, Gender Inclusive Game Design, Expanding the Market. Please welcome Sheri Graner.
You can do it. My turn to try to make this work. So this is an interesting topic for me. They asked me to speak about inspiration, and I thought, okay, why do I make games? Why do I do this? This hasn't been an easy road for any of us, particularly for those of us who are women in this industry, so I started to think about it. So I sat down to make my slides, and I started with the typical thing. I'm Sheri Graner. I started in the game industry in 1989 at Origin Systems. I've gone on to work at Sony Online Entertainment. I've worked for Cartoon Network. I've done work for the U.S. military. I wrote Gender Inclusive Game Design, founded Women in Games International. But this is the information you can find on me about me online. So I want to talk about something a little bit different. I want to talk about where I started and how I got started in this making these games. So I'm from McAllen, Texas. Now, if you don't know where McAllen, Texas is, it's down there. It's not the end of the world, but we can see it from there. Seriously, McAllen, I don't even know how to explain it, 28,000 people. But our football stadium for our high school sat 10,000 people, and we filled it every Friday night. So I grew up on a cattle ranch outside of McAllen, and we also had Texas Star Ruby Red Grapefruit. So it was pretty fun growing up that way, but it really was very isolated from the rest of the world. And so we didn't have a game shop, we didn't have comic shops, we didn't have book shops. There was no place for me to come in contact with any of the things that a lot of my other game developer friends have said influenced them. The first Star Wars movie didn't come down to the valley until it was in its second playing. That's how far off we were. So this showed up in our Sunday paper one day. I don't know if you guys ever seen Parade magazine, but it was talking about something called Dungeons and Dragons. I was immediately just entranced. What is this? Is this something I can learn to play around in the world of the Lord of the Rings? That was amazing. That was magic. So I started asking all my friends, who knows how to play Dungeons and Dragons? Does anybody know how to? Nobody. Nobody had even heard of it. They didn't know what it was. So I actually took an ad out in my school paper. I'm not kidding. I did. Please, somebody come teach me to play Dungeons and Dragons. And I finally found somebody, and he and I, by this time I'd gathered a couple of other friends, and we all decided we wanted to learn to play Dungeons and Dragons. And so he came over, and he came over a couple of times, and then he didn't show up one day. And I called his house, talked to his mom, and I said, is Shannon on his way over to play today? And she said, no. And I said, well, is he there? And she said, no. I said, where is he? She said, he joined the Army. So now I'm in McAllen, Texas, with no more person that can teach me or continue to run my game of Dungeons and Dragons. However, Shannon had left his dice, his books, and a little module called Keep on the Borderlands that basically explained to you how to run a Dungeons and Dragons game. And I figured that if I was going to get to keep playing this wonderful game that allowed me to escape in the world of the Valley, that I had to learn to run Dungeons & Dragons. So I did. So I taught myself to play Dungeons & Dragons. So we're going to fast forward. Oops. From McAllen, Texas, I moved to Austin. Usually there's an animation here. I moved to Austin, which is right there in the center of Texas. And by this time, I was regularly running Dungeons & Dragons, and I had started to build all my own rule sets around it and build all my own modules, my own stories around it, and I had a weekly game. So I had this weekly game that was running. It had been running for a while. And I had spun this big story, and we had taken, I had a regular group, and I had kidnapped one of their friends, and I had them taken off by a monster. And they had spent several sessions of this game chasing after the monster, trying to rescue their friend. We'd come down to the big climax of the story, and the game, we were sitting in my little apartment, in my little kitchen, And the group had followed the monster down into the lair, and they were all on a mezzanine. The characters were on a mezzanine looking down into a pit where their friend was being chased by this monster. And they were having to figure out how to get down there. And their friend, the monster was getting closer, and their friend was starting to get injured by this monster. And they were trying to figure out, and one of my players, slammed the table, pushed his chair back and said, "I can't watch this anymore," and got up and walked out. I can't watch this anymore. We were sitting in my tiny little apartment kitchen on a table with pizza boxes and greasy character sheets. But it dawned on me, he wasn't sitting there. He was down there. He was in that dungeon. He was watching his friend. I had managed to take him away from this world and transport him into this imaginary world with nothing more than dice and paper and pencils and a rule set that I'd kind of finagled around to make the way I wanted it. That was magic. That was the moment I knew this is what I wanted to do. I took them, I can take an ordinary person and transport them, and I can make them into heroes. Just that easy. That was it. That was what I wanted to do. And I was lucky enough that I was in the right place at the right time, because when I started in '89, there really wasn't a game industry to start in. There was a handful of companies, and I was lucky enough that I was in Austin, where Origin Systems was. And I happened to have somebody who worked at Origin was in my weekly gaming group. They had an opening for a writer. They said, "Sheri, you've been writing all your own rules and scenarios for a couple of years now. I think you'd be perfect." And I walked in and I handed in my resume, had an interview with Warren Spector, who then hired me and started me at Origin Systems. Since then, I've gone on to work for a lot of other companies, Cartoon Network. Like I said, I work with Shell Games. I've done a lot of stuff. So you might be thinking, well, Sheri, it's real easy for you to say that you want to take people away when you're working with role-playing games. But I've done it for more than role-playing games, too. You can find this magic in any of the games that you're creating. The center game over there is a game that was called Geo Commander. It's a game I did for the U.S. military. It taught RF geolocation and signal processing. Now, there's a snoozer. But we built a real-time strategy around that to teach these principles. And then we put it out into the military, the U.S. Navy, to see how it worked and how the operators liked it and if it improved their training ability. I got word back that we had operators who were going back in and breaking into the training room after hours to keep playing this game. I'd done it. Once again, I'd taken these people away from PowerPoint at 8 a.m. and they're hungover and they don't really want to be there after all, and I had them breaking in to come back and play a training game. That's the magic. Being able to take these people and make them into heroes and put them into another world. So why do I make games? That's why I make games. I make games for the audience. I make games for the magic. It doesn't have to be a AAA game. It doesn't have to be some big, amazing license. I can do it with training on, signal processing. I can do it with potty training, which is what we did with the Daniel Tiger games. Anything I can do where I can take the people and I can make them into heroes for that magic moment and give them the escape. That's why I make games, and that's my inspiration. Thank you.